and welcome back to another episode of The Furnace Remnant. It's been a while since the last one, but I will say there's been a lot of valuable lessons learned in the time since the last episode. God's been really speaking to me in my heart about a lot of things, and I'm really grateful. And there's one thing He's really driving home the last 2 or 3 days that I hope I can get written down in some form that I might be able to share later on. I still feel like I'm in that process of knowing what I've always known in my head, but now, it going to me knowing it in my heart on a far deeper level. And as I've said before to people, and maybe I've said it here, I don't remember, but for me, it seems like those are the longest journeys I've ever taken in my life. Those things that I know to be true in my head, for those things to make it to my heart. So it's good to be back doing another episode. I'll probably end up doing a couple episodes on this subject. Um, really something that it's been with me for a while, but it took a while to kind of sit with it and know how I wanted to write this out, how I wanted to present it. And so I think I'm sorry, I'm kind of stalling because on my notes, I keep them on my phone and I forgot to turn off the auto lock. So I'm trying to stall for a bit while I get this situated. Bear with me here. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about when numbers replace trust. You ever notice how quiet compromise is at first? It doesn't come in loud, doesn't announce itself. Starts small, almost reasonable. A number. Jeremiah 17:5 from the ESV, which most of the time that's what I'll be reading from here on out. Thus says the Lord, cursed is the man who trusts in man and makes flesh his strength, whose heart turns away from the Lord. That's the foundation. Not really about people, it's about where your trust actually sits when things get real. Look at King David for a second. 2 Samuel 24:2 says, so the king said to Joab, go through all the tribes of Israel and number the people, that I may know the number of the people. And remember, God told him not to do that, not to take a census. And then later on, same chapter in verse 10, but David's heart struck him after he had numbered the people. He felt it. Before anything happened, he felt it. Like that moment where you already know, yeah, that wasn't right. But the consequences didn't stay internal. In verse 15, it says, so the Lord sent a pestilence on Israel, and there died of the people from Dan to Beersheba 70,000 men. That's heavy. A shift in trust actually carried weight. And think about it. He was told not to number the people, the living, and it ended up in him having to number the dead. Now look at Gideon. Judges 7:2 says, the Lord said to Gideon, the people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand, lest Israel boast over me, saying, my own hand has saved me. Too many. Not too few, too many. So God starts cutting it down. Not because they were weak, but because there was too much room to take credit if they won. That's the contrast. David adds numbers to feel steady. God removes numbers so trust stays clean. And also so that the glory remains his. Let me make this real for a second. I had a disagreement with a family member once. They posted about another family member's health on Facebook, asking everybody to pray. And I pushed back. Not because prayer is wrong, but because how we treat it matters. I said some things should stay private. And if we're being honest, sometimes that kind of post isn't about prayer, it's about attention. They told me they believe in strength in numbers. And I get that on the surface. But I told him if that's true, you live 5 minutes away. Why not drive over there? Why not actually show up? Why not ask what they need? And here's where it ties in. As praying people, we can't just treat prayer like a numbers game. Prayer isn't a comment section. It's not a tally. It's spiritual. It's real. It's warfare. And not everybody who says, I'll pray, is actually praying. Some people don't even acknowledge God in their own lives. So what are we really asking for there? That's not being elitist or even me being a sanctimonious jerk. That's just recognizing not all numbers carry the same weight. If we're being even more real, not everyone saying they're for you actually is. That's why I feel it's more important for me to ask a small number of people for prayer than a whole group. We really want people who are aware of the battle, the spiritual battle, who know the rules of engagement when it comes to prayer. Now bring that back, because this mindset is everywhere. Attendance, streams, followers, reach. And yeah, none of that is automatically bad, but it gets off track when that becomes the thing you check to see if you're okay. Because once numbers start defining success, they start quietly steering things. And when they steer things, truth starts getting adjusted. Not all at once, just enough. We celebrate growth more than faithfulness. We platform what performs, not what convicts. And if I'm being real, that's not just out there. That can creep in here too, inside us. That's how something sacred slowly turns into something transactional. Which is why Jesus says, He said to them, It is written, My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you make it a den of robbers. Matthew 21:13. That's not just about money. That's about taking something that's supposed to be for God and using it for something else, turning it into output, turning obedience into performance. So let me ask it like this. If the numbers dropped, what would actually change? Would the message stay the same? Would the conviction hold? Would you still show up the same way? Because when Gideon's numbers dropped, things got clearer. And when David's numbers went up, something in him got exposed. Numbers just don't measure growth. They show what you're leaning on. Blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. Jeremiah 17:7. So yeah, the goal isn't to pretend numbers don't exist. It's just not letting them take that place. Not letting them tell you who you are. Not letting them tell you what to say. Not letting them tell you who God is. Because you can build something that looks right, sounds right, even grows right, and still be off at the root. And what's not rooted right, it won't last the fire. How many pastors out there won't preach that message for fear of losing the numbers? And remember, the Lord holds a winnowing fork. He separates the grain from the chaff, the wheat from the chaff, I'm sorry. Maybe that separation is necessary to keep things on the right track, to keep our hearts steady. This is the furnace remnant.